Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, May 31st, last day of May, 2022. And in honor of Memorial Day and the last day of May, I've decided to start the show completely disorganized and about 15 seconds behind schedule, which is not a big deal for you, perhaps, but it's an enormous disturbance for me. So that's it. No more show. Goodbye. I'll figure out what we're going to do later on. Alright. Well, that's going to make things a little bit difficult. Probably in the editing stage. But okay. Otherwise, I think we probably can remain under control. And then in the unlikely event of either a water landing or a replay of this show at some later date, but on some other platform, we'll have to raise the red flag that we will fall 15 seconds short. I don't know how people are going to react to that. They're not going to react to it, is the real answer. Of course, it's not a problem at all. Don't worry about it. We can pick up where we left off last week and carry on from there. Much went on over the weekend and much ignored because it was a holiday weekend. It was hard to keep up with things, but lots of you sending some links to important stories and information, and of course morning tweets to get us started, even though I guess Bill's been waiting an extra 15 seconds for us to read this one. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now, at long last, I should say. It's the first Tuesday after the third Monday, after the 14th Wednesday, of the 56th Saturday, after the 9th Sunday. And it probably is at some point, if you trace it back far enough. You'll find that to be true. You know what that means. Kagro X is going to tell us right now. You put me on the spot. It means, of course, well, I think as everybody knows, if you do the calculations, 15 seconds less show. It's about what I would expect to have discounted the show. After being told, by the way, last night, this is part of the reason for the disorganization today. I will blame it on this. No. Didn't really make any serious difference, but I was told yesterday that if you were one of those sky watching type people, if you stayed up late, you could look up in the sky and you had a chance of seeing perhaps the meteor storm of the century. The century, I say. Play some music. Yeah, please. I blame the rest of the studio staff for not playing that music quickly enough. Anyway, apparently the Earth, we were making our way through. When I say we, I mean the Earth. Me and the Earth. I like that. We were making our way through the, I guess, still existing trail of a comet that had been destroyed at some point. I'm not certain why, but probably, there's probably a video of it somewhere. Watch this comet absolutely destroyed by, Stephen Colbert or something like that. And we were flying through this, space junk remnants of a comet. And, well, to be fair to, I don't know who, the universe, the word was that it could be quite spectacular or, not so much. And guess what? It was not so much. But if you stayed up and we're outside and looking up around 1 a.m. Eastern Time, which is something that sometimes happens with me anyway. I mean, I'm usually looking upward, but indoors. But 1 a.m. isn't terribly unusual. But yet, something more annoying about waiting for it at 1 a.m. I guess I could have been getting ready to finally turn in and get some sleep. But instead, I was outside waiting for the meteor storm, shower, what have you. It turned out to be something less than a meteor drizzle. I didn't see anything. And KITM staff were outdoors with me yesterday because they live here. And saw one or two indications, although it wasn't like a usual meteor storm with a streak across the sky so much as a bright flash in places. But I was excited by the prospect because they said, it could be outrageous, could be spectacular. And I guess in defining the difference between a meteor shower and a meteor storm, storm, more meteors, I guess. But apparently, at some point, the last time there was a genuine meteor storm visible, I guess, in our area, it was so intense and so many meteorites, or meteors, not meteorites, but so many meteors flashing through the sky, streaking through the sky, that it gave some observers a sense of vertigo, making it look like the Earth was moving through the stars, like you were flying in warp speed or something. I would love to have seen that. If you're going to get vertigo, that's the way to get it, in my opinion. So anyway, it was nothing like that. Instead, it was more like, oh, my neck is sore and I'm tired of this and it's time to go to bed. And it's 1:30 and I haven't seen the thing. So a bit of a bust. Hopefully some of the rest of you, if you were up, got to see something more than we did, but a little bit of a disappointment. But I'm used to that. Every time I stay up to try to see a meteor shower, it's a particular bust for me. Usually it happens that the rest of the family gets out there, whoever is going, and that's typically my wife and no one else, will go out and see one or two, and then by the time I make my way out there, it's over, or we don't see anything more. When I get there, it's all done. That's the end of it. Okay. All right. Well, let's see. Recovery for late start Tuesday means a little bit of late tea sipping on the air. Here you go. Enjoy. Everybody, 1, 2, 3. Ooh, a little sweet today. All right. Well, that'll be good. Anyway, so let's see. Let's catch up with some things that people are sending along over the weekend. Let's see. Our Montreal girl, BJ Hutch, who sends this note via the KITM hashtag. Canada vows to freeze handgun sales and buy back assault-style weapons. So congratulations to Canada, the first mover on the reaction to the latest American mass shooting. We're usually the last mover. I mean, that was the development of the weekend, right? Was that we began moving into the mode of saying, oh, this time is going to be totally different / exactly the same. I mean, I don't mean to be a cynic about it, and I hold out hope, and there's a march coming, and it's a little too soon to write off that nothing will happen. But it is awfully difficult to believe that anything will change when so many Republicans in Congress are just so dug in on not doing anything. They appear to love to troll people about the fact that they're not going to do anything. I did see an interesting tweet thread over the weekend. I don't know if I put it aside, but I did retweet it, so I should be able to scan down. But Shannon Watts of Mom's Demand / Everytown, I'm not really sure what exactly the relationship is there, but they overlap in some way. At any rate, she just, I guess if you're getting ready to give up hope that anything will change, it's important for you to read her thread about how these things do, in fact, take time, and that there has, in fact, been some remarkable progress. Part of her thread, I'll just point out from memory, was that when she began working with and organizing Mom's Demand, in 2013 or so, about, I think she said something like half of the Democratic Congressional Caucus had A ratings from the NRA. Now, lots of things have changed since then, including the scheme by which the NRA does its rating, and it was very intentionally, I think, ended up being skewed in such a way that was designed to give Republicans A ratings and designed to give Democrats F ratings. But it's important to note that half the Democratic caucus was essentially very concerned about staying attuned to the NRA message, and now there are none. That is to say that there are no Democrats in the Congress left with that A rating. They're no longer measuring themselves and their performance against what the NRA is asking them to do. And that's pretty remarkable, really. It's not a lot of time since 2013 or so, just under 10 years. That may feel like a long time to some of you, but in things that move at a glacial pace, that's really not too bad. All right, well, let's check in with, speaking of glacial paces, this is not to say that Canada moves at a glacial pace. They move pretty quickly here. It's just glacial. It's cold there. They have glaciers. So I figured I would use that. Canada vows to freeze glacier. Handgun sales, buyback assault-style weapons. Who's writing here? Amanda Coletta for the Washington Post. We'll just get a flavor from the first couple of paragraphs. I get the sense of what's happening from the headline, right? Canada on Monday introduced new gun control legislation that, if passed, so it's a big if at this point, would implement a national freeze on buying, importing, transferring, and selling handguns, effectively capping the number of such weapons already in the country. Interesting. It's an interesting approach. We'll see how that goes over with Canadians. I don't know that they have as much of a love affair with the handgun. No, nobody has as much of a love affair with the handgun as America, clearly. But, there's a gun culture to Canada, to be sure, but I guess it's more about rifles, shotguns, hunting than anything else. Or at least, I'd like to think so. That's something I would like to think about you, Canada. The bill, which officials here cast as the most significant action on gun violence in a generation, also includes red flag laws that would allow judges to temporarily remove firearms from people deemed to be a danger to themselves or others, and stiffer penalties for gun smuggling and trafficking. We recognize that the vast majority of gun owners in this country are responsible and follow all necessary laws, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau told reporters in Ottawa. We are, however, facing a level of gun violence in our communities that is unacceptable. And I haven't heard much about that, but really, you shouldn't be accepting very much gun violence, if any, at all, I think. And I think the Canadians are probably even better justified in saying that than we are. The proposed legislation came after mass shootings in Texas and across the U.S.-Canada border in Buffalo in recent weeks have revived a long-simmering debate in the United States, sort of, about whether Congress might act to curb gun violence. Unfortunately, the reality in our country is gun violence is getting worse and has been getting worse over the past years, Trudeau said. We need only look south of the border to know that if we do not take action firmly and rapidly, it gets worse and worse and more difficult to counter. Yes, that's meant for us. We're supposed to realize that. Okay, tea time. Many provisions of the proposed legislation were featured in a gun control bill that was introduced last year, but that did not pass before a federal election was called in August. Gun control advocates criticized its buyback program for banned guns, which was voluntary. Liberals pledged stricter gun control measures if reelected. So now what? Such measures enjoy broad public support here, particularly in urban centers. The Liberal Party typically employs guns as a wedge issue during federal election campaigns, painting their conservative counterparts as supportive of easing gun control measures to gain an edge. Gun control advocates have long called for a national ban on handguns, but some provincial and municipal officials have opposed one. The freeze envisioned by the proposed legislation is not a ban, because people who already own them would continue to possess and use them, but they could only transfer them to businesses, and chief firearms officers would be barred from approving the transfer of handguns to individuals, whoever they are. But, different system up there. The bill's likely to pass with the support of the New Democratic Party. The Conservatives on Monday criticized liberal gun control efforts, charging that they unfairly target law-abiding gun owners and fail to adequately stamp out the smuggling of illegal weapons across the borders. Today's announcement fails to focus on the root cause of gun violence in our cities. Illegal guns, sorry about that, smuggled into Canada by criminal gangs. Raquel Dancho, the conservative public safety critic, said in a tweet, "The PM has had 7 years to fix this serious issue, yet he continues to chase headlines and bury his head in the sand." And I don't know if they really made that noise, but at any rate, the measures unveiled on Monday come after the government banned 1,500 makes and models of military-style assault weapons in 2020 after a gunman posing as a police officer charged across rural Nova Scotia, killing 22 people, including a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, in the country's deadliest mass shooting. So, all right, that's an interesting response. I'm certain that they're glad that they did that, and now handguns come next. Which American gun enthusiasts would, of course, say, aha, see, slippery slope. They might be right, but I say pour more oil on that slope. The government said Monday that it plans to introduce a mandatory buyback program that would offer compensation to owners of the banned firearms. Details of the program are expected this summer. And the government hopes to begin buying back the guns, including AR-15s, the kind used in the school attack in Texas, by the end of the year. All right. Well, I think you get the idea at this point. Speaking of buying back the guns and what was used in the attack, I think it was an important point made over the weekend. I think Peter Manso had been watching this and keeping track of it. The gun, or the AR-15 used, I think he bought two, but he only brought one of them for some reason into the school. But there's been a lot of discussion of this because the shooter the murderer bought some extraordinarily expensive guns. I mean, some top-of-the-line AR-15s. And the fact that the manufacturer apparently sold them over the internet. I mean, there's still federal regulation you have to go through in order to actually make the delivery. But basically, they were sold over the internet. They have to be delivered to a licensed firearm dealer, and you have to pick them up from them. They won't ship them directly to your house. I mean, I guess that's something. Not much, but it's something. At any rate, they're top-of-the-line guns, like $2,000 weapons, and everybody was wondering, where does the 18-year-old get the money for two of these $2,000 weapons? And apparently the answer is that they'll not only sell them to you over the internet, but they have a financing plan, like zero cash down and X number of months to pay, same as cash. So they're financed like same as cash. There's no interest rate. And of course, if you're planning on going out in a gigantic shooting spree and possibly killing yourself at the end of it, I suppose you're not that worried about what happens if you can't make the payments. So, maybe we shouldn't allow that. It's been so difficult over the years, and people have been complaining about it, and they're chipping away at the regulations that prevent it. But why can't I buy XYZ over the internet? Why won't they just deliver this straight to my home? Maybe we could do something about the idea of simply saying, well, maybe there can't be financing programs and zero cash down sorts of things where they send these weapons to you over the internet. Anyway, it's Daniel Defense is the name of the company. I understand that they skipped the NRA convention this year. Reasonably wise of them, I guess. But they've turned up once or twice before, Daniel Defense, and they're a weird company. And Peter Manso's been watching them and knows how weird they are. Let me see if I can find his tweet while I pause for another sip of the tea here while it's still hot. You can all sympathize, right? Okay, pardon me for interrupting the show. But yeah, Peter Manso, who writes about this and many other things, has written about the guns as an issue for a long time. Religion in America is his typical beat. But he pointed out, the big splashy part of what he pointed out is Daniel Defense is kind of a small boutique maker, as you might have guessed from their price tag, for one thing. But they have a record. That is to say, their guns have turned up at mass shootings before. The Las Vegas murderer, who, by the way, has I try to remind people from time to time, shot 500 people. I mean, that's a surprising fact that's sort of lost about the Las Vegas shooter. People just, don't really discuss that anymore for some reason. And it seems kind of weird. And 500 people shot. But he also had Daniel Defense weapons. And I find that kind of odd. Here's Peter Manso talking about it. He says, here's the story to read on religion and Daniel Defense, maker of the Uvalde shooter's weapon. The article is from 2017, when the Christian Gun Company, that is, they consider themselves a Christian company, these gun manufacturers, when this Christian gun company was also involved in mass murder back in the ancient days of 2017. And it's from that article that you come to learn that they're the people who sold the Las Vegas shooter some of his weapons too. And so basically two of the splashiest, most audacious mass shootings in American history, both supplied by this one tiny, relatively speaking, tiny arms manufacturer in Georgia, seems kind of like defying, it defies explanation other than, or as a coincidence. It really just doesn't make any sense as a coincidence. It must mean something. So the Atlanta Journal-Constitution did this piece on them. Again, this is back from 2017 after they discovered, the Las Vegas shooter. And by the way, one thing about the Las Vegas shooters, I don't think we ever got any kind of explanation. There was no manifesto left behind. But that shooting has remained weirdly unexplained. I mean, all mass shootings are basically unexplained and unexplainable. But that one was they just said, we don't know. No, there's nothing to, or, I don't know whether that was really true or not. It makes me feel like they read something so alarming that they just said, it's better to just say, we don't know the motive here. Maybe that's the case. I got no idea. Anyway, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, to make this other point. Faith, family, firearms drive Georgia's devotion to Second Amendment. The writing here by Alan Judd at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The outsized American flag flies above the factory where Daniel Defense makes some of the world's highest-priced assault rifles. At NASCAR races, the number 3 car flashes the Daniel Defense logo. Did you know that? And when the company's founder talks about his values, he distills them to 3 potent words. Faith, all right. Family, sure. Firearms, that's an unusual inclusion. Daniel Defense, based in Bryan County, Bryan, Bryan County, 25 miles northwest of Savannah, is a Georgia success story, one that embodies a culture that often conflates patriotism, religion, regional pride, and devotion to the Second Amendment. But the company and the culture came under scrutiny last week, that would be back in 2017, after the worst mass shooting in modern U.S. history. Late Sunday night in Las Vegas, 64-year-old jerk by the name of someone, well, I guess we'd still not bother giving the name this many years after? Sure. But a 64-year-old whose actions have never been explained opened fire on an outdoor music festival from his 32nd-story hotel suite, killing 58 people and wounding nearly 500 before taking his own life. Authorities reportedly found about 20 guns in the hotel suite, including at least 4 military-style rifles manufactured by Daniel Defense. The rifles appeared prominently in crime scene photographs by the Las Vegas police. Our deepest thoughts and prayers, remember them, are with the victims and the families in the Las Vegas incident, the company said Monday on its Facebook page, back in 2017 again, its only public statement on the shooting. The biggest one ever, and that's all they had to say. Company executives did not respond to telephone messages and emails requesting an interview, so that by the time this mass shooting came around in Uvalde, they actually had practice in how will we handle the PR when our guns turn up at mass shootings. And the answer is you say thoughts and prayers and then shut down for the week. Daniel Defense is one of about 150 firearms manufacturers in Georgia, part of an industry that draws more praise for its economic impact than questions about how its products are used. Twice in the past 4 years, Governor Nathan Deal has announced expansions in the workforce at Daniel Defense, touting the company's growth as evidence of Georgia's business-friendly environment. I mean, worker unfriendly, but business friendly. Firearms restrictions have never been popular in Georgia, regardless of the potential effect on manufacturers. In recent years, mass shootings haven't inspired gun control measures. They've justified making firearms more ubiquitous. Since 2014, state legislators have made it legal to carry guns in bars, in some churches and schools, on college campuses, and in unsecured areas of airports. Next year, lawmakers may authorize guns in state parks. And that was 2017. I don't know if they've gotten around to it at this point. All right. Many state officials take offense at any suggestion that they consider gun regulations in the aftermath of a mass shooting. Absolutely disgusting. You know this guy's name? He's the Secretary of State at the time. Brian Kemp. Absolutely disgusting, a Republican candidate for governor at that point, said last week. Leftist nonsense, said another candidate, State Senator Michael Williams. He didn't make it, of course, as governor, but maybe his time is still to come. In an interview last week, Deal was asked how Georgia could prevent mass shootings. He steered clear of even mentioning new laws. It's certainly a tragedy and something we'll probably never truly understand, he said of the Las Vegas shooting. And lo, we have not come to understand the Las Vegas shooting. That prediction was true. But we just hope something like this never happens in our state. Let it happen elsewhere, apparently. We'll make the guns and let it happen elsewhere. All right, then a little bit of the description, and it's kind of interesting, of the company itself, but very interesting Peter Manseau's point about this. And after the break, we'll come back and at least give you Manseau's overview of things. Why does it matter that this one company shows up at least two of these mass shootings, and what their philosophy on guns is? Find out after this.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's continue on with reading the story about Daniel Defense, the company that manufactured the murderer's weapon at the Uvalde shooting, but also, as it happens, the murderer's weapon at the Las Vegas shooting back in 2017 itself, or was it 2016? 17, I think, shooting in Las Vegas. But let's get a little information about the company itself, and then we can wind it up and let Peter Manseau make the point that he wanted to make in all of this, and move on to a couple other tangential subjects. Marty Daniel started Daniel Defense more than 15 years ago, no, even more years than that, in Savannah after he couldn't find the rifle accessories he wanted and ended up designing them himself. My rifle isn't cool looking enough, or awesome, or deadly enough, and I need to start my own company. I owned some ARs and I really just fell in love with them. Not really, really something you want to say in society, but I guess in Georgia Gun Society you can. We learn a lot every time, once in a while, when we go through this and take a look at the people who really and truly do fall in love with their guns. It's an odd thing, but whatever. A lot of photos circulating over the weekend of people, I guess a book that compiled the stories and photos of the gun collections of some of America's wackiest and weirdest, I guess. But at any rate, let's stick with this. Marty Daniel starting Daniel Defense more than 15 years ago. He owned some ARs and fell in love with them. And isn't that so easy to do? Daniel, 54 at the time, said in a video posted on his company's Facebook page, "What I wanted in an AR was the best one made. I think today that's where we are." Today, Daniel Defense makes weapons for U.S. Special Forces and for the British military, but mostly it sells high-end semi-automatic rifles to civilians who pay $2,000 to $3,000, far more than the $500 to $1,000 that some brands cost, which are pretty expensive as it is. Sales at the privately held company totaled $73 million last year, Daniel told Forbes magazine. Daniel comes across in interviews as an earnest advocate for the right to bear arms, one whose profit motive runs second to his fervor for the Second Amendment. He says businesses would have flourished his business would have flourished if Hillary Clinton had been elected president, but he backed Donald Trump anyway. So you can see, of course, profit motive is only second in his mind because he voted for the guy who is all about profit motive. Sure. Anyway, Daniel has described his company as a niche manufacturer that poses no threat to industry leaders. It poses a threat to the rest of us, yes, but not to other industry leaders. But his profile has grown along with his company's shortly before last November's election. Again, this is back in 2017, so we're talking about the 2016 elections. Trump named Daniel to a gun rights advisory panel. This year, an affiliate of the National Rifle Association named a Daniel Defense rifle Gun of the Year. Woohoo! The company became the prime sponsor of Richard Childress's number 3 car, Richard Childress Racing's number 3 car on the NASCAR circuit. It's the number used for years by Dale Earnhardt, the legendary driver who died in a crash in 2001. In promoting gun ownership, Daniel and his company often invoke God and country, common sentiments in the firearms industry. On social media, the company recently posted apparent criticisms of professional athletes who kneel during the national anthem. Ooh. And Daniel told Breitbart News, which tells you about where his head is, the nationalist website run by former White House advisor Steve Bannon, that he believes the Second Amendment has a divine provenance. You hear that a lot. But that's the major point, and that's what hooks Peter Manso on this thing. We are in business, we believe, to be a supporter of, not the Second Amendment, the gospel. Yeah, you read that right. We are in business, we believe, to be a supporter of the gospel, Daniel said, and therefore a supporter of the Second Amendment, which is also logic that defies explanation. We're in business to be supporters of the gospel, and therefore, because we're supporting the gospel, we support the Second Amendment. That's unusual. In other words, not only do we have those Second Amendment rights because God gives them to us, but also the gospel. That's unusual. During a recent interview with Carbon TV, a network that features outdoors programming, Daniel talked about a memorial service in Savannah for Army Rangers who had died in combat. A photograph on display at the event showed the soldiers and their guns. Or, that is to say, the soldiers' guns. But guess what? They were also Daniel Defense guns. They were holding our product, he said, his voice breaking. Like he's really super proud of this. I mean, I guess it's more so with soldiers than, murderers. But hey, take your pick, I guess. It's an honor, and we just appreciate each one of those guys and what they've done for our country. There are two types of people in the world, he added. There are good people and there are evil people. But just in case evil people get in charge, good people need to have the ability to fight back. It's one of those government tyranny things. What about if evil people get in charge and they have your weapons? How about that? To many Georgians, guns have little to do with good and evil. They're just part of life, said Jerry Henry, executive director of GeorgiaCarry.org, a gun rights organization that has successfully pushed the relaxation of firearms restrictions. It wasn't long ago, Henry said, that a kid walking through a small town with a shotgun or rifle might be asked one or two questions. You going hunting? Or, you been hunting? Even in the state's metropolitan areas, every mass shooting creates a surge in firearms purchases, dealers say, expanding the gun culture into new realms. or as the books and pictures we saw over the weekend testify, deeper into the same realms very often as well. Steve Cernek, or Chernek, I'm not sure, Cernek, 51, who manages a greeting card store in Cumberland Mall, decided to buy a gun after the 2016 shooting in the Pulse, a gay nightclub in Orlando. 49 people died in that attack. Chernek bought a Heckler & Koch, I'm guessing K-O-C-H, that pronunciation, maybe Koch, I don't know, Heckler & Koch 9mm handgun, and joined the Pink Pistols, a group organized for LGBTQ gun owners. It has 45 chapters across the country. When he saw what happened inside the Pulse, he said he decided not to become a victim himself. Hopefully he hasn't, and hasn't accidentally shot himself in the time while he was waiting. If gun sales were restricted, Chernek said, all the innocent people will be left with the criminals with the guns. If I can help prevent or lessen the severity of a situation, he said, then the better. Miguel Zamudio, 24, bought his first gun after his son was born 3 years ago. It's always always interested in the people who say, I'm buying the gun because I have a family, because I have young children at home, which is just so, I think about it in the gun sale context, and it just makes me so worried for them. Now he carries his Glock every day. A lot of things can happen within 5 to 10 minutes before police come, Zamudio said. Don't worry about the police. It's not going to change anything when they get there. If someone wants to carjack with my son inside, I can't let them do that. I have to do whatever I, as a father, need to do. He wants Georgia to leave its gun laws as they are. Georgia is Georgia, and I'm glad it's a gun-friendly state, Zamudio said. It doesn't restrict me. Jamie Barnes, a 38-year-old interior designer from Decatur, was thinking about buying a gun even before the Las Vegas shooting. She's single, and some break-ins have been reported in her neighborhood, or so she thinks anyway. So last week she drove past Stoddard's Range and Guns in Midtown Atlanta. She decided to stop in. And yet, she seemed conflicted. She had seen reports that the Las Vegas shooter owned dozens of guns and had bought many of them in recent months. She favors limiting the number of guns a person could buy during a certain time frame. Why would you be able to purchase 33 guns within a year, she said. That's off. But I'm not a gun person, so maybe that's normal. Certainly to Daniel Defense it is. On September 28th, 3 days before police found several Daniel Defense rifles in Las Vegas shooter's hotel suite, the company sponsored an informal opinion poll on its Facebook and Twitter accounts. The picture showed a row of the company's assault rifles lined up on the ground as if ready to shoot. The poll's question, can you have too many? Golly gee, I guess that profit motive is so secondary to his belief. But did you catch the part about the way he connects everything logically in his mind? That, again, the Second Amendment rights are God-given rights, and they really mean that. And it's like you can't point to any scripture that says you should have guns, because there weren't any. And there's scripture you can, manipulate into meaning anything, I guess. But no, really, there were no guns at the time. Anyway, as Peter Manso says in retweeting this article, he asks, why does this matter? It's important to understand that for the manufacturer of the shooter's gun, selling it to him, like if you thought, shame these people into how could they hold their heads up when they are the ones who made and sold, and with financing at that, the guns to the Uvalde shooter, the guns to the Las Vegas shooter, and I mean, they don't really exactly hold their heads up. They duck. They don't go to the NRA convention during at least if it's immediately following the shooting, they don't show, and they shut down for the week, and they don't answer any press inquiries. But they are proud of themselves when the silent period ends. Why does it matter? It's important to understand that for the manufacturer of the shooter's gun, selling it to him was a religious act. Their right to sell it to him is a religious right. They may offer thoughts and prayers, but they also believe that selling guns is godly. it's not very likely that you'll be able to shame them after an event like this into stopping their sales. I mean, that's never going to be the case just from a business perspective. But personally, they view having put the gun in this person's hand as a godly act. They may not have done the right thing with it, but that's on them. But God wanted me to sell that gun to any, hey, what can I tell you? He's got a plan. I guess to anyone, even to that person. God actually wanted that. That I don't really know how you deal with that. Let's see. There's actually a thread on this, some of which I missed. Peter's tweeting a quote from the article. "We are in business, we believe, to be a supporter of the gospel." That was the very striking line that we read before. Daniel Defense's founder said in 2017, and therefore a supporter of the Second Amendment. In other words, not only do we have those Second Amendment rights because God gives them to us, but also the gospel. Not sure exactly where he's trying to get at here. There's another tweet that says, in 2017, Breitbart also did a story on Daniel Defense, praising it for supporting, quote, the freedom of the gospel by supporting the Second Amendment, unquote, there. But then back to where we were before. Why does it matter? It's important to understand that for the manufacturer of the shooter's gun, selling it to him was a religious act. That's quite scary and freaky. The author of the piece in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Alan Judd, is on Twitter. Peter Manso discovers. And so he points everybody in Alan Judd's direction. He's Alan Judd with 2 Ds, 3000. If you'd like to follow along. Always worth reading through the rest of Peter's threads here. Someday, he says, there will be a story about violence in America that does not have at least one religion angle hiding in its shadow, but today is not that day. Worth noting, he says, that the Daniel Defense CEO is a millionaire GOP, GOP, GOP funder. He's the rich, polished version of the guns, God, and Trump mindset, heavily represented on January 6th, as seen below, with a attachment of one of Peter's earlier tweet threads. Religious framing of the Second Amendment has much in common with the theology of the insurrection. He's attached his October 19th, 2021 tweet where he says, I was curious if this fugitive January 6th rioter, not certain which one that is, but whether he might be another example of hashtag capital siege religion. Sure enough, his family's gun shop provides insight into his beliefs. Actual quote, we called it Rapture Guns and Knives because we're serving your gun and knife needs till Jesus comes. It's kind of odd that they integrate that into what they're doing in such strange ways. Forms of American religiosity and American nihilism find common cause in Second Amendment absolutism, belief in excessively arming oneself for apocalyptic conflict, and belief that nothing matters but it's cool to own weapons of mass murder are indistinguishable in their expression. For God so loved the world that he gave his only gun, as they would have it, I guess. All right, John, which he quotes as John M. 16. Very clever. Okay. It's weird out there, folks. Be careful. I promised you, or I didn't promise you, but I told you, I mentioned to you Shannon Watts's tweet thread about the time frame in which she's been working on Mom's Demand, and I thought I might read through it. It'll, I think, hopefully help sustain you through even the hard part of this advocacy work when or if nothing happens again. Just a reminder of kind of where we were and where we've gotten to. And yeah, it's taken a while. And it was actually very reminiscent of the way I think of filibuster reform work in a lot of ways, except, of course, most people don't get murdered during filibusters. So it's a kind of a different issue. But it seems to have developed in much the same way. This is her first tweet, tweeting a picture of her at a press conference. Nancy Pelosi is speaking. I see former Senator Barbara Boxer there, then Shannon in between Boxer and Dianne Feinstein, still there, of course, as we well know, tweeting this message. This is me 10 years ago. I had just started Mom's Demand as a Facebook page, but it quickly grew into an offline grassroots movement. I was a mom of 5 living in Indiana, and I naively thought it would take a few weeks to change our federal gun laws. I was wrong. I was sitting in the Senate gallery a few months later when Manchin Toomey, a bill to require universal background checks, failed by a handful of votes. I thought we would all go back to our normal lives because America wasn't ready for change. Again, I was wrong. What we realized was that Congress isn't where change begins, it's where it ends. So we spent the next decade working in state houses, passing hundreds of good bills and stopping the NRA's agenda 90% of the time. We elected gun sense champions, helping flip the U.S. House in 2018. A lot of important points here. I just want to pause on this tweet for just a second and point that out. A lot of good things. I know we have always frequently felt like saying, nothing changes. But Greg has stopped us on occasion and said, well, here in Connecticut, we've passed a number of good state laws. I mean, we haven't solved the problem here in Connecticut or nationally or anything like it, but it's not the case to say that nothing has changed. And this too. I mean, I have no reason to believe this isn't true, but what a stat. Stopping the NRA's agenda 90% of the time. Remember that a lot of times what we're reading is what people have proposed as a gun law. And a lot of times reporting makes it easy to gloss over the fact that this stuff hasn't happened yet. As we were talking about what's up for consideration in Canada, it's a bill. I mean, it'll probably pass, and that's a great thing. But, every once in a while we talk about it. And you see in the wake of a mass shooting, crazy bills to loosen gun restrictions. And you think, well, who would have the nerve even to introduce such a thing? And you get more caught up in how ludicrous it is than the fact that, it never passed. It never had any chance. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But that's actually quite remarkable. Like, wouldn't you want to get behind a group that has been able to stop the NRA's legislative agenda 90% of the time? We all prefer 100%, but I would think that, I don't know, if you were looking to donate money, for instance, that maybe a group that has, claims the record of being able to stop the NRA's agenda 90% of the time might be of importance to you. Also, as they said, electing gun sense champions, helping flip the U.S. House in 2018. Yeah, right. I mean, don't forget that that's the case. It hasn't gone back since, and guns were a wedge issue, and one that helped enable the change in control of the House of Representatives. Keep thinking about that as we fight to maintain that control this time around. She goes on, though. When I started doing this work back in 2012, about a quarter of all, not half, thankfully, about a quarter of all Democrats in Congress had an A rating from the NRA. Today, none do. That's both a function of campaigning for gun sense, as she says, gun sense champions, and defeating people who were, a little over the top in their pro-gun sentiment. It also means, of course, that the NRA got a lot more pointed in the way they built their lists in ways that were designed to boost Republicans and sink Democrats with their voting bloc. So, although they were likely to move out of that, the A rating approval zone anyway, don't forget, that's one of the big things that changed in the NRA's approach to things over the years, that they became much more partisan in their approach to politics. That is, they were always conservative leaning, of course, but the fact was that you could find conservative Democrats and back them if you wanted to, but they became much more in the pocket of the Republican Party and vice versa, which I guess I can pause at this point and thank Lisa Iannucci for sending along this morning Shannon Watts's morning tweet thread, which begins this way. Hey, you know what would be interesting to revisit right now? The decade-long relationship between the NRA, Russia, and Donald Trump. And you're right, Shannon Watts, but first we'll finish your first weekend thread. But yeah, that's a great point. When she began doing this work, about a quarter of all Democrats in Congress had an A rating from the NRA. Today, none do. Getting an entire political party to realize that they can vote their conscience because a grassroots army will have their backs is pretty seismic. I mean, I wouldn't lay it all at the feet of that movement, but it had a lot to do with it, I'm sure, and getting people to realize that, you know what? Forget trying to stay good with the NRA. Most people aren't good with the NRA, and we'll have your back if you break away from them. I mean, again, there's a lot going on here, but a good point. There's more. Gun safety is now a winning issue up and down the ballot in this country. It's how we flipped the House in 2018, electing our own Moms Demand volunteer and gun violence survivor Lucy McBath to represent a Georgia district. We were just reading about Georgia and their gun culture. A Georgia district that had been dominated by Republicans for 30 years. Polling shows gun safety helped us flip both chambers of Virginia's General Assembly in 2019. It helped us change the balance of power in state houses in Colorado and Nevada and New Jersey and New York. And it helped us win the White House and the Georgia U.S. Senate seats in 2020. Don't forget about that. As much of a pain in the neck as it is to be dealing with Manchin and Sinema when we have a basically 50-50 breakdown in the Senate. But it would have been worse, like not 50-50 at all and not Democratic at all. But Republican had the Georgia U.S. Senate seats gone the other way. My point, she says, is that none of this life-saving work would have happened if we'd given up in the spring of 2013. From educating millions of families about secure gun storage, to passing laws that disarm domestic abusers, to unlocking millions for community violence intervention programs. We're still waiting for a cathartic moment in Congress, a sign that the logjam can be moved and goodness can prevail among our elected officials regardless of political party. I want that too, and I'm hopeful because I reject cynicism, which too often is an excuse for inaction. And then she concludes by saying, "This is me now," a picture of her at her own press conference on the Capitol grounds. "What I thought would take 3 months turned into a full-time volunteer job for nearly a decade now. My kids are grown. I've lived in 3 states. I have gray hair. But hope is a discipline, and every morning I wake up and choose to be an activist. Every day it's up to each of us to renew our commitment to refuse to live in a nation where people are preventively, senselessly slaughtered, where 110 Americans are killed daily and hundreds more are wounded. No matter how long it takes, join us." And then, of course, the appeal to actually join the organization contained therein in art card form. But yeah, the main points here, I love the issue of my point is that none of this life-saving work would have happened if we'd given up in the spring of 2013. The first time they realized, oh, we're not going to get that change that we thought was inevitable. That how could they possibly not do this, that, or the other thing in the wake of one shooting or another, and in this case, probably Sandy Hook, which was a turning point for a lot of people in terms of believing nothing could ever be done. But that if you just stop because it didn't happen the first time, well, then you don't get the benefits listed herein. 90% of the NRA's agenda stopped. Flipping control of the House of Representatives. Maintaining or gaining control of the Senate in the 2020 elections when Georgia, of all places, sends 2 Democrats to the Senate. All of this is true, and all of it, like I said, reminiscent very much of the filibuster reform fight that didn't happen the first couple times. We thought we had the momentum to do it at the beginning of new Congresses back when that was the plan, to try to do it then ahead of the game. And then we learned, hey, there's another way to do it right in the middle of the Congress too, and lo and behold, taking us all by surprise in 2013 when the filibuster was eliminated for the judicial and executive nominations. Anyway, just a lot of similarities. Both the idea that, oh my gosh, if we just give up because we didn't win, well, then nothing will change, and this does take some time. And also that a sort of a seismic change in the way things are, that in 2012, a quarter of the House Democratic Caucus had an A rating with the NRA, and a decade later, the lines are as sharp as they can possibly be. No Democrat can get an A rating or will get an A rating because we've revealed the partisan lean of the NRA. Everyone kind of knew it leaned Republican, but there was the cover of, well, if you're good on guns, we'll endorse you even if you're a Democrat. And over the course of 10 years, we've been successful in both moving Democrats off the NRA agenda and forcing the NRA's hand on defining itself as a clearly partisan organization. At the same time, apparently they are also very interested in declaring themselves a Russian organization in the same way. How interesting is that? Maybe as we head into the break, we can read a little bit about that. As I said, Shannon Watts tweeting on that one too. You know what would be interesting to revisit right now? The decade-long relationship between the NRA, Russia, and Donald Trump. Attaching the CNN article from, let's see, when? September 27th, 2019. Just reminding you of what that headline is. Top NRA officials knew Russians were using ties to the NRA to establish a connection with the next U.S. president. That would be Donald Trump, the report says. That's the work of Sarah Murphy and Kate Sullivan for CNN, but maybe the thing to do is to see what's in her thread as we head into the break. Back in 2010, Alexander Torshin, an upper-ranking member of Putin's party, became involved in the U.S.-Russia exchange program that the FBI believes was an elaborate cover for a Washington-based Russian spy recruiting effort. Around the same time, Torshin is connected to a Nashville lawyer who has an office in Russia, who in turn connects Torshin to the then NRA President David Keane. In 2011, Torshin is introduced to a young Russian woman named Maria Butina. Remember her? Ultimately, he hires her as a special assistant, and simultaneously she becomes the founding chair of Russia's new gun group, the Right to Bear Arms. You remember this, don't you? Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's continue on reading Shannon Watts and her tweet thread. And by the way, this tweet thread is not current. It's from back on March 1st. So it was to say in March was when she thought it would be timely to remind everyone of the connection between Donald Trump, the NRA, and Russia. But it's timely now, too, as Lisa reminds us by sending this on to us this morning. And, so it was Alexander Torshin, the, oligarch who decided both to try and facilitate this closer relationship with the NRA and to try and duplicate the look, anyway, the look and structure of of a gun rights advocacy group in Russia. And Maria Butina somehow rises to the position of running that. Also in 2011, then NRA President David Keane appointed John Bolton to lead the NRA's Subcommittee on International Affairs. Hold that thought, it says, and, we'll like to hold all thoughts, I guess, about John Bolton. Table them for the moment. In 2012, Torshin attended the NRA annual meeting as a VIP guest of the NRA president. That year, Torshin also traveled to the NRA's D.C. headquarters and to the home of Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador to the U.S., whose future contacts with Trump's campaign will raise red flags. Ooh, not red flags. Everybody in the gun circles hates those words. In 2013, then NRA President David Keane and Alan Gottlieb, leader of the Second Amendment Foundation, attended the Right to Bear Arms' first convention, quote-unquote convention, in Moscow. Gottlieb is pictured here on that trip with Torshin and Butina. You can see him in the middle of the photo here in bow tie. Is Butina the tallest of the group, or is that just the angle at which the photo is taken that makes it look that way? Anyway, back to Bolton. In 2013, Bolton and Butina collaborate. A video appears online of Bolton delivering an address to Right to Bear Arms. supporting the group's pursuit of a gun rights amendment to the Russian Constitution. In 2014, U.S.-Russia relations are tense after Russia's invasion of Crimea. Torshin said he steered the legislation that annexed the territory, within Russia, interesting, and appeared with Putin at a signing ceremony. Butina denounced U.S. sanctions and advised a militia group helping Putin seize Crimea. But the NRA is still Russia's BFF. Butina attends the NRA's 2014 meeting in Indianapolis, meeting with the highest-ranking officials in the NRA, including CEO Wayne LaPierre. She also travels to NRA headquarters that year, meeting in person with Kaine. In 2016, Butina attends the NRA's annual meeting again, this time in Nashville, where Trump is a keynote speaker. And Trump says, "We need strength. We need people that are respected. Putin has no respect for our president," Trump said in his speech. Torshin claims he met Trump in Nashville, and that Trump said to him, "So, you're from Russia. When are you going to invade Latvia?" Some question. The Trump White House denies, of course, that the encounter took place. But it's reported here by Rolling Stone, that's the attachment to the tweet, inside the decade-long Russian campaign to infiltrate the NRA. At the end of 2015, Torshin and Butina invite NRA leaders to a right to bear arms convention in Moscow. Attendees include Kaine, Peter Brownell, CEO of one of America's largest gun sellers and eventual NRA president, as well as Trump surrogate and then Milwaukee Sheriff David Clark, with all of his flair on his vest, of course. At this time, Butina, now a Russian celebrity appearing in magazines, is still on the Russian government's payroll as special assistant to Torshin, and Torshin has been appointed deputy governor of the Russian Central Bank. It's 2016 now, and Butina enters the U.S. on a student visa. She attends the NRA's annual meeting in Kentucky and hangs out with NRA President Brownells, who has been implicated as a go-between in the corrupt relationship between the gun lobby and Russia. As reported in the attached article here from the Washington Post, which is headlined, Pete Brownell, who heads major supplier of firearms accessories, resigns from the NRA board. Remember about that? The NRA officially endorses Trump at that Kentucky meeting, marking the gun lobby's earliest ever presidential endorsement. Trump vowed in his speech, "I will never let you down." That same year, the NRA publicly gives Trump $30 million for his campaign. However, sources suggest that the true total was actually far greater, $70 million or more, through untraceable dollars, possibly from Russia. In 2017, Butina tries to secure a Russian jet fuel deal with the help of Kaine, now former NRA president, and his wife, Donna, a Washington lobbyist. The botched deal puts Butina on the FBI's radar. You remember that one? In 2018, the same year, Bolton becomes national security advisor, like actual U.S. national security advisor. Butina is arrested and pleads guilty to being directed by the Russian government to, quote, establish unofficial lines of communication with Americans having power and influence over politics. Ooh, well, she did do that. House Democrats asked for documents showing whether Bolton disclosed his prior connections to Butina, citing concerns that Trump's first national security advisor, Mike Flynn, was not forthcoming about his communications with Russian officials. Oh, yeah. In 2019, the Senate report revealed that the NRA had acted as a, quote, foreign asset for Russia in the period leading up to the 2016 election. That's what it actually says. NRA was a foreign asset to Russia ahead of 2016. Evidence presented in the NRA's bankruptcy trial in 2020 included a monthly bill from NRA attorney Bill Brewer for the month of December 2020 that included legal bills of over $59,000 for, quote, Russia. whatever that might mean. Butina, 33, who returned to Russia in October of 2019 after spending 15 months in several U.S. penitentiaries, including 4 months in solitary confinement, now represents Russia's impoverished Kirov region in the Duma. Did you know that? I think we've mentioned that. Last week, Butina, whose unfettered access to Trump and NRA officials was based on her commitment to unfettered access to guns, said Ukraine should not hand out weapons to its citizens in case a child gets hurt. I remember that, yes. She might have ulterior motives there. Maria Butina makes a video here in this next tweet attached to it, encouraging people to draw a white Z on their lapel to show solidarity with the invasion of Ukraine. She's a pretty bad person. And let's see, what's this? Breaking, Elena Branson coordinated with Putin to promote Russian propaganda in the U.S., illegally acting as a Russian foreign agent while operating U.S.-based organizations, the DOJ says. And here she is with fellow Russian agent and NRA ally Maria Butina. I don't think I know anything about Elena Branson, but there's an article attached here. Dual national, charged with acting as unregistered Russian agent in U.S., according to prosecutors, and that, according to Reuters, also in early March of this year, March 8th, 2020. New, added at the time, this March 9th, added to this thread. The Russian agent who infiltrated the NRA is pushing Putin's propaganda again, claiming Ukraine is bombing itself. We have tons of evidence that the Russian army does not bomb civilian populations, Maria Butina said. Oh, well, no one believes you. That's pretty interesting. Okay, so just a little bit of extra bonus lying about a equally grotesque situation. But very interesting and very worth spending some time on. I have a feeling that that may become relevant in the near future again. Okay, thanks to Lisa for reminding us of Shannon's earlier tweet storm on that. Let's see. Speaking of the various plots and intrigues, I've got a couple of pieces here that might be of some interest. Let's see. How about this one from the New York Times? This over the weekend, shedding a little bit more light on another angle of the various Trump schemes currently under investigation. Alexandra Berzon reporting for the New York Times. Lawyer who plotted to overturn Trump loss recruits election deniers to watch over the vote. Once again, the coup out in the open and in motion for set up for 2024. A central figure in the scheme to reverse the 2020 election is mobilizing grassroots activists into an, quote, army of citizens trained to aggressively monitor elections. We're talking here about Cleta Mitchell, the lawyer who was actually on the phone with Trump for the Brad Raffensperger call, and covers herself in glory, of course, there. Oh, by the way, she's photographed here wearing a very fancy scarf on her suit here. I don't know, can't tell whether it's a pantsuit or not because the photo cuts off. But as you know, you have to listen to all people who wear these scarves, even if they're handing you a line of nonsense. Let's get the flavor for this article here and what's up. In a hotel conference center outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Cleta Mitchell, one of the key figures in a failed scheme to overturn Donald Trump's defeat, was leading a seminar on, quote, election integrity. You know, kind of what that means for them. We are taking the lessons we learned in 2020 and we are going forward to make sure they never happen again. Whatever that means. Ms. Mitchell told a crowd of about 150 activists in training she would be, quote, putting you to work, she told them. In the days after the 2020 election, Ms. Mitchell was among a cadre of Republican lawyers who frantically compiled unsubstantiated accusations, debunked claims, and an array of confusing and inconclusive eyewitness reports to build the case that the election was marred by fraud. Courts rejected the cases and election officials were unconvinced, thwarting a stunning assault on the transfer of power. Now Ms. Mitchell is preparing for the next election, working with a well-funded network of organizations on the right, including the Republican National Committee. She is recruiting election conspiracists into an organized cavalry of activists monitoring elections. In seminars around the country, Ms. Mitchell is marshaling volunteers to stake out election offices, file information requests, monitor voting, work at polling places, and keep detailed records of that work. She has tapped into a network of grassroots groups that promote misinformation and espouse wild theories about the 2020 election, including the fiction that President Biden's victory could still be decertified and Mr. Trump reinstated. One concern is the group's intent to research the backgrounds and local and state officials to determine whether each is a, quote, friend or foe of the movement. Many officials already feel under attack by those who falsely contend that the 2020 election was stolen. In an extensive review of Ms. Mitchell's efforts, including documents and social media posts, interviews, and attendance at the Harrisburg seminar, reveals a loose network of influential groups and fringe figures. They include election deniers as well as mainstream organizations such as the Heritage Foundation's political affiliate, Tea Party Patriots, and the RNC, which has participated in Ms. Mitchell's seminars. The effort, called the Election Integrity Network, is the project of the Conservative Partnership Institute, a right-wing think tank with close ties and financial backing from Trump's political operation. Mitchell says she is creating a volunteer army of citizens who can counter what she describes as Democratic bias in election offices. We're going to be watching. We're going to take back our elections, she said in an April interview with John Fredericks, a conservative radio host. The only way they win is to cheat, she added. Well, as you know, every Republican accusation is a confession. Now we know they cheat with, fair certainty, I would say. The claim that Mr. Trump lost the election because of improper conduct in election offices or rampant voter fraud, is false. Mr. Trump's defeat was undisputed among elections officials and certified by Democrats and Republicans, with many recounts and audits verifying the outcome, including the Cyber Ninjas lunatic audit as well, right? Trump's Justice Department found no evidence of widespread fraud. Trump lost more than 50 of his post-election challenges in court. Campaigns, parties, and outside groups from both sides of the political spectrum regularly form poll monitoring operations and recruit poll workers, and Republicans have in the past boasted of plans to build an army of observers, raising fears about widespread voter intimidation and conflict at the polls that largely have not materialized. Some former election officials say they are hopeful that when election skeptics observe the process, they might finally be convinced that the system is sound. But several who examined Ms. Mitchell's training materials and statements at the request of the New York Times sounded alarms about her tactics. Mitchell's trainings promote particularly aggressive methods with a focus on surveillance that appear intended to feed an activist's distrust and create pressure on local officials rather than ensure voters access to the ballot, they say. A test drive of the strategy in the Virginia governor's race last year highlighted how quickly the work, when conducted by people convinced of falsehoods and fraud, can disrupt the process and spiral into bogus claims, even in a race Republicans won. I think it's going to come down to whether they are truly interested in knowing the truth about elections or they are interested in propagating propaganda, said Al Schmidt, a Republican and former city commissioner of Philadelphia who served on the elections board. By the way, I'm reminded of Glenn Youngkin's son apparently showing up twice attempting to vote despite the fact that he was only 17 years old. And it does make me wonder whether we saw that in the right light, whether that was just a goofy kid misunderstanding things because of what he had been told by a friend earlier, if there even was such a friend, or whether it was an attempt to cast that ballot and then say, look, see, fraud is going on. We can prove it, even though it was us, and therefore something. Makes me wonder whether it was more nefarious than we were led to believe. Asked about her project at the Pennsylvania training, Ms. Mitchell declined an interview request and asked the reporter to leave. In a statement emailed later, she said, the American election system envisions citizen engagement, and we're training people to assume roles outlined in the statutes. Mitchell's operation sits at a tension point for her party. While the establishment is eager to take advantage of the base's energy and outrage over 2020, some are wary of being associated with or held accountable for some of the more extreme people in the movement. The feeling is mutual among activists, many of whom believe the RNC did not do enough to back Trump's challenge. The RNC's involvement is part of a return to widespread election work organizing. For nearly 30 years, the committee was limited in some operations by a consent decree after Democrats accused party officials in New Jersey of hiring off-duty police officers and posting signs intended to scare Black and Latino people away from voting. The committee was freed of restrictions in 2018. And guess what? They went crazy. This year, its multi-million-dollar investments include hiring 18 state election integrity directors and 19 state election integrity lawyers. The party has so far recruited more than 5,000 poll watchers and nearly 12,000 poll workers, according to the committee. These efforts are separate from the Election Integrity Network, said Emma Vaughn, an RNC spokeswoman. But in multiple states, the RNC election integrity directors have been involved in Ms. Mitchell's events. Vaughn acknowledged that party officials participate in events hosted by other groups to recruit poll workers and poll watchers. She noted that in many states, poll monitors must be authorized by the party. The RNC is training its monitors to comply with laws protecting voting rights, she said. So we'll see whether they actually do. The RNC works with other groups who have an interest in promoting election integrity, but the party's efforts are independent of any outside organization, Ms. Vaughn said. Anyway, you get the sense of what's going on here. We'll read a little bit more. Harnessing the energy is the next section here. Since 2020, scores of local groups have popped up around the country to promote claims about the election. Many are run by activists with little experience in politics or elections, but who have amassed sizable membership lists and social media followers. They are spurred on by national figures touring the circuit and spreading false claims. Ms. Mitchell stepped in to harness that energy. The 71-year-old lawyer has been a steady and influential force in the voting battles. Once a liberal Democrat in Oklahoma, Ms. Mitchell has been a fixture of the conservative movement. She has represented the National Rifle Association and was on the board of the American Conservative Union. She has worked closely with Virginia Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, on organizing through the Council for National Policy, a national coordinating group for conservative leaders. In August of 2020, Trump tapped her to prepare for the post-election litigation. She enlisted John Eastman, the lawyer who crafted the specious legal theories claiming Vice President Mike Pence could keep Trump in power. A movement is stirring, Mitchell wrote to Eastman just 2 days after the election, but needs constitutional support, which it never really got because Eastman just faked it. Mitchell helped the president argue his case to state officials. She was on the phone with Trump when he asked Brad Raffensperger to find 11,780 votes that could reverse Trump's defeat there. Her latest effort is organized through the Conservative Partnership Institute, a nonprofit organization where she serves as a senior legal fellow and where Mark Meadows, Mr. Trump's final White House chief of staff, is a senior partner. Mr. Trump's Political Action Committee, Save America PAC, donated $1 million to the group last year. Ms. Mitchell described herself as a key conduit between activists and the Republican Party leadership. We are trying to bridge the gap between the grassroots and some of the issues we've had with the party, she told trainees at the event outside Harrisburg. Mitchell is no doubt connecting with some of the fringe groups and ideas some of the party once avoided. In Virginia, for example, Ms. Mitchell helped a nonprofit organize a coalition that includes Virginians for America First, a group advocating for hand-counting ballots. It's a position popular among some of those who believe conspiracy theories about foreign hacking in the 2020 election. The group was funded by Patrick Byrne, the former Overstock.com executive who is now a major benefactor of the election denial movement. In Michigan, Mitchell's group held a training session in May that was sponsored in part by a coalition of grassroots groups called the Michigan Election Protection Team. The RNC's state election integrity director brought together the coalition to recruit poll workers. According to its website, the coalition includes LaRouche PAC. How about that? A committee dedicated to Lyndon LaRouche, the deceased conspiracy theorist, and Let's Fix Stuff. That's the actual name of an outfit run by a former Republican state senator who has promoted a theory about the 2020 election that Republican Michigan Senate leaders denounced as, quote, indefensible, whatever it might have been. The RNC sent both its national and state election integrity directors to Mitchell's training near Harrisburg. The state director, Andrea Raffel, had worked alongside Mitchell for months on the event. One of the speakers told the attendees Ms. Raffel, as well as an organizer from Heritage Action, would be joining a new coalition of election activists led by Tony Schupp, or I'm not sure how she pronounces it, Shuppe, a fast-rising state activist, organizers announced. Ms. Schupp's group, Audit the Vote PA, has become a leading peddler of misleading data about the election in Pennsylvania. Last year, the group set out to find evidence of fraud by canvassing neighborhoods in search of discrepancies between election results and information collected from residents, a method that election experts dismiss as invalid because people are crazy and they just make up whatever they want. And so, sure, there's a discrepancy between what crazy people say and what actually happened. But note for the record, by the way, all of these groups, everybody's got a group, and every group has funding, and some of it comes from, whatever, Overstock.com guy and the Pillow guy and who knows what, Trump's super PAC, and compare it to the total absence of support mechanisms on the Democratic side or the liberal side, the progressive side. As I was reading through Shannon Watts's tweet threads earlier, I know that she says that she has served in her position as a volunteer coordinator this whole time. And I don't know what that means, if it means in the sense that she's got no remuneration whatsoever, or she's, got a paid job from one or another organization, but volunteers her time for Mom's Demand or some portion of it, or I don't know what, or all her expenses are paid, or none of them are paid, and she's impoverishing herself. It's entirely possible on the Democratic side that that's the case. I brought to mind, also over the weekend, I received a tweet from somebody, I guess, who was just unfamiliar with Gunfail. And, it's easy to be now that I haven't really been concentrating on that for a long time now. So lots of people have joined Twitter or social media or Daily Kos for that matter and have no clue that ever existed. That's just the way it is. But somebody actually suggesting to me and John Lovett from Pod Save America that somebody ought to, or you ought to, what the suggestion was, you ought to follow gun violence and how many people are killed by gun violence for 30 days or so, and compile all the numbers and report it, because people will be surprised by the numbers compiled by month. And, it was kind of a little bit depressing to say, yeah, I actually kind of did something like that for 5 years or so. And it's hard to say nobody noticed, because people did. And it made a slight difference in the way gun violence or, accidental gun violence was covered in some newspapers. Really you need to sustain that effort and make sure that it stays the case for a long time. And of course, Scott Charles has said, how frequently how inspirational that was in rededicating himself to the idea of distributing the free gun locks in Philly. And that's, hands-on, on-the-ground stuff that makes a real difference. And you can't turn your nose up at that by any means. And some of that came from the Gunfail thing. But it occurred to me that both with Gunfail and with the filibuster reform work, that there was a lot in it that reminded me of it. I don't know what Shannon Watts's deal is and who pays for what, but it was certainly the case. It's certainly the case that there's a lot of money being donated to Mom's Demand and Everytown. And a lot of it is coming from one source, Mike Bloomberg. That's true, too. But, people are supporting it. And just thinking about the fact that, it's my own fault for not dedicating myself to the funds are there if you want to chase them. I just didn't want to spend my time doing that as opposed to the stuff that I actually thought was necessary and enjoyed doing. But there was no organization behind Gunfail. Nobody paid anything ever at all for that. There was no sponsorship for that. There was no billionaire behind that. There was no fundraising done for that. And by the same token, largely the same was true for the filibuster reform stuff. There were places where, I should say Daily Kos occasionally paid a small monthly stipend to continue to do all sorts of things, both this show for a while when it was Daily Kos Radio and the Gun Fail series when that was ongoing. And there was some small stipend provided through the good offices of Darcy Burner for filibuster reform way back when. But anything like what they've got? No. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's take this time then to continue on a little bit with what's going on. Return to the article about Cleta Mitchell and what she's up to. Oops, except it's one of like 75 tabs I have open here. Anyway, I didn't mean to get off onto the tangent of that, but it's an important theme that we have to return to every once in a while, not just because, oh, poor me or anything else, or poor anybody else. There's about 100 people with the same story right now, and about 1,000 people with the same story over the past 10 years, but it's an ongoing issue. We don't have anything like the support mechanisms and support networks for left-wing activists that we do for right-wing activists. You kind of have to build it on your own. There is such a network, but it tends to focus on, well, the same small circle of activist groups that have always existed, many of which I think are at this point, though they work on important issues, perhaps a little bit outdated in their approach to things, although many of them are adapting. Some of them are using their funding to adapt to the shorter attention span social media realities. That's clearly true. And occasionally some important things do get funded and sponsored, and they certainly have no difficulty in getting the message out over at Everytown and Mom's Demand, and whether or not that's, it shouldn't result in, vast personal wealth or anything like that for the people who are doing the advocacy, and I don't think that they insist that it does. But some level of support that makes it possible to continue doing the work. I don't know whether that's been the case for Shannon Watts or not, and if it has been, good. We don't begrudge it, we want it. Although, to some extent, it would be nice to be more open about it, because we could show people that this is possible and that you could make a real difference if we could organize this way and lift people with effective voices up and give them the means to continue doing this stuff. And I don't know whether it's happening, so I don't know whether we can feature it. But I don't know why it should be such a secret. But that's the big contrast that jumps out at me, that's not about the main point of this one article that I'm reading, but how many people's names we've introduced from this article about Cleta Mitchell, and the names of the various organizations that they are supported by. And Cleta Mitchell is probably drawing support from 6 to 10 different groups. And each one of those groups has their own people that are only drawing support from that one group, but those groups exist. We're just, reading through it. They just sort of, they sound like random cast-off names to us, because they are. We don't know anything about the organization and what they do, and we have some good guesses about what they do and who's funding them probably, but each time you mention one of these things that you've never heard of, there's people, drawing livelihoods, 1 to 5 people at minimum, drawing full salary and livelihood and maybe even expense accounts from each one of these things. And it's kind of crazy that happens, but I guess good for them. They support what they believe in, whereas we struggle and then we wonder about why we keep losing the messaging wars and the culture wars, etc. Where do we leave off here? All right, we were talking about who? Miss Shupp, Tony Shupp, a fast-rising state activist organizer. So, okay, how do you become a fast-rising anything? Just happens, I guess. Nobody supports you at all. Ms. Shupp's group, Audit the Vote PA, right, has become a leading peddler of misleading data about the election in Pennsylvania. Last year, the group set out to find evidence of fraud by canvassing neighborhoods in search of discrepancies between official election results and stuff residents were willing to say. Did you see some cheating? Yeah, totally. What did you see? I seen some cheating, some total cheating. Well, that's different. That's a discrepancy between the official word on how the election went and what you saw. Yeah, I guess it is. All right, here's money. Good job collecting that. Ms. Shupp has admitted to flaws in her data, but stands by the conclusions of her analysis. Earlier this year, she circulated a petition that declared citizens' right to, quote, throw off such government that intends to keep the truth behind the 2020 election hidden. They're not acknowledging my conspiracy theories, which I made things up, and therefore they're hiding the truth. Now Ms. Shupp is recruiting election activists using what she learned at Miss Mitchell's and other training sessions. She said in an interview, so far around 200 people have signed up. She said, just know that we have a plan, she wrote the day after the Harrisburg seminar to her 15,000 Telegram subscribers. We'll never quit. This must be fixed. There is no going back to sleep, and 2020 still needs, well, it says still needs decertified. Still needs to be decertified? All right. Much of Ms. Shupp's plan is laid out in The Citizen's Guide to Building an Election Integrity Infrastructure, a 19-page manual Ms. Mitchell has distributed at trainings and online. The document includes some typical guidelines for poll monitors, but elections experts also noted tactics that aren't routine. The manual advises activists to, quote, be ever present inside elections offices and to meet with post office officials to observe every step of the vote-by-mail process allowed by law. They're advised to keep careful records, including details on any encounter that is intended to make you uncomfortable being at the election offices. They recommend aggressively crowdsourcing the accuracy of voter rolls by collecting affidavits from residents and mailing letters to try to identify potential, quote, bad addresses. They advise each group to enlist tech-savvy volunteers who they suggest can become expert on the specific software and equipment in each county and what the vulnerabilities are. Activists also were advised to research the backgrounds of election officials, key staff members, and even people inside Attorney General's offices who work on election issues. The question they should pose about the Attorney General's office is that a friend or foe, it says. Coaching poll monitors to consider election officials as enemies is a formula for conflict, said Tammy Patrick, a former federal compliance officer for the Maricopa County Elections Department in Arizona, who reviewed the manual. 60 to 70% of the content is educational. It is observation, it's transparency, said Ms. Patrick, who's now a senior advisor to the elections program at Democracy Fund. But throughout the document, there is this pitting of people against the elections officials or the people that they're there to learn from. Note there in passing the mention of the Democracy Fund. That's something happening on the liberal side. If they're being obstructionary and slowing the process down, that's going to be incredibly challenging, she said. Mitchell said election officials should have no problem with citizens asking questions and helping them do their jobs better, but that's not what's happening, of course. She noted the activists are instructed to be courteous and respectful, but they're also deplorable, so what are you going to do? Indeed, at the Harrisburg training, Jenny Beth Martin, the leader of Tea Party Patriots, there's another group, we've heard of this one, but someone's drawing their salary from there, a conservative advocacy group, in case you didn't know who they were, suggested activists use a 3-word response whenever they become frustrated with officials. Bless your heart, she said. Now, this section, a test run in Virginia. Ms. Mitchell has repeatedly held up Virginia, and particularly Fairfax County, as the national model, ahead of last year's governor's race between Glenn Youngkin, you know who he is, and Terry McAuliffe, you know who he is. She helped a Virginia nonprofit organize dozens of groups into a coalition. There's dozens of groups? For what? Who cares? They pass out money. We'll take it. The network ultimately trained 4,500 poll watchers and election workers and organized 18 local task forces, a number that has since doubled, organizers say. In Fairfax, a Democratic bastion outside Washington, about 3 dozen activists associated with the coalition and the local Republican Party rotated through election officers, combing through voter registration applications, undeliverable mail, and other materials. Christine Brim, the task force's leader, appeared in person or emailed staff nearly every day, according to Scott Konopasek, the registrar at the time. Who pays Scott? We do, because he's the registrar. Who pays Christine Brim to bother him every day? I don't know. Maybe no one. Maybe she just did it every day like I did Gunfill every day. But I have my doubts. The operation ate up county workers' time with dozens of information requests as well as informal interrogations, Mr. Konopasek said. Well, so much for helping them do their jobs. Sure. Everything they saw that they didn't understand was fraud in their minds, and that's how they would frame the questions, he said. It was always accusatory. And it's probably supposed to be. It's meant to wear down the patience of elections officials and either make them quit or make them try to shut you up, make you try to shut up by giving you what you want once and for all. Steve Knotts, the Fairfax County GOP chairman, said the activists were merely trying to get answers, particularly because the state had initiated new voting procedures. But elections officials would often dodge their questions or brush them off, he said. Maybe it offended a few people. It wasn't intended to be that way. 2 weeks before the election, the nonprofit behind the Virginia Coalition filed a lawsuit accusing the county of violating state voting law by accepting at least 339 ballot applications that were missing Social Security numbers. A judge ruled that the group did not have standing, which did not settle the legal question or the dispute. The GOP activists continued to press Mr. Konopasek and other election workers about it. He and others said. The Gateway Pundit, a right-wing website, reported on the complaint saying the state of Virginia is being stolen again. Well, it's a Commonwealth, you jerk, so technically you're wrong. It's a republic. Oh boy. Anyway, we saw it on the 2020 election, and we are seeing it again. Except they didn't. Virginians for America First, the coalition member that promotes hand-counting ballots, began posting reports online purporting to show potential problems with absentee ballots and other issues. It is also clear that the level of potential fraud is significant enough to affect the outcome of these elections, said one memo dated 5 days before the election, which sentiment mysteriously disappeared after they apparently won. On Election Day, Republican poll watchers in 13 polling places were observed being disruptive, hovering too closely, or taking photographs, according to reports that election workers filed to the county. Election workers at 3 sites had similar complaints about Democratic poll monitors. Complaints from 10 sites did not specify the poll watchers' parties. In at least one case, according to reports, a voter who spoke Spanish left without voting after what 2 poll workers believed was intimidation from a Republican poll watcher. Poll workers in other locations noted Republican poll watchers acting like, as one put it, sleuths. They should not be able to act like Detective Chief Inspector Barnaby ferreting out clues, that poll worker wrote. Adrian Constas, a poll worker and volunteer with the League of Women Voters, said it almost felt as if Youngkin hadn't won. If Youngkin hadn't won, it would be like we're gathering evidence so we can take it to dismiss precincts or dismiss a process of voting. After the election, the party activists continued to press for change. They put a new Republican on the election board, someone Ms. Brim, the group's leader, describes as a real activist. We needed a fighter, she said, and she recounted her work for the activists in the Harrisburg training. The new board member, Christopher Hensel, told the Times he would promote transparency to ensure that elections are both fair and perceived as fair. Despite some concerns about these groups' involvement, the 2021 election overall ran smoothly. It might have helped to have the most skeptical people closely engaged, said Christopher Piper, who until recently ran the Virginia Department of Elections. Yes, it was a little bit more annoying, but I think at the end of the day it's worth it so people can see the process and feel comfortable and know that it's a safe, secure process, Mr. Piper said. Well, that's a naive view of everything, of course. But Mr. Knobsek, the former registrar of Fairfax County, resigned in March, in large part because of how difficult Ms. Brim and others were making his job, he said. In his 30-year career, he said he had never seen anything like it. If there's an absence of goodwill, there's nothing you can say that's going to reassure someone or win them over or change their mind, he said. And that's just true. And a great conclusion to the piece and really getting to the actual point of things. Let me add this to the picture. This doesn't have anything to do directly with it, but I just thought this stood out for me just in terms of I don't know what Republicans in disarray, I guess. They're in that election, or that picture there, that column, that article, they're in array just fine. But here's a disarray article. I just thought this was of some interest, given what's developing on the Republican side these days. From Politico on the 28th. So what is that? I can't even keep track of what days or what. Today's Thursday. Tuesday the 30th, 31st rather. Yesterday is the 30th, so the 20th. So Saturday in Politico, Donald Trump Jr. making an appearance here, issuing a warning to Elise Stefanik's camp. Don't go after Tucker's kid. I didn't even realize that was happening. But an interesting thing to see with her name being touted as a possible vice presidential running mate for Trump should he actually, climb out of the golf cart and run in 2024. So she's setting herself up for that, and Donald Trump Jr. getting in her way here, which is of some interest. She faces plenty of future GOP leadership competitors, including Jim Banks, and her camp got burned after allegedly raising Banks's aide, Buckley Carlson. So that's where that comes from. How did Tucker Carlson's kid get in the middle of all this? One, his kid is an adult. And two, he works for Jim Banks, and Jim Banks thinks maybe they can parlay that into jumping the line in front of Elise Stefanik, who is herself a line jumper. Olivia Beavers and Meredith McGraw wrote this piece for Politico. Allies of Donald Trump Jr. issued a stark warning to Elise Stefanik recently. Keep friends' kids out of your political rivalries. That's one way of putting it, but of course it's a Carlson. So it's not just a kid, for one thing. And not a kid at all. Those Trump Jr. allies were recently told that Stefanik's camp was behind an effort to plant negative stories about Representative Jim Banks of Indiana, a potential Stefanik competitor in House GOP leadership. It was also relayed to them that part of the effort involved bringing up Fox News host Tucker Carlson's son, Buckley, an aide to Banks, according to 3 Republicans familiar with the conversations. Intermediaries for Trump Jr.'s camp, and I can't believe he even has a camp, conveyed to Stefanik backers that they believe she had crossed the line by bringing up Carlson's child, who isn't a child, according to 2 of those Republicans. Politico, and who better to make that complaint than Trump Jr., who, when he gets in trouble and is attacked, Trump himself defends, they're going after my children. 40-something years old. Politico was unable to confirm the veracity of the pro-Stefanik whisper campaign against Banks, but whether real or rumor, the pushback came from allies of the former president's eldest son and could imperil the New York Republicans' hope of elevating to a bigger party post. 1 year after deposing anti-Trump Representative Liz Cheney from the number 3 House Republican post, Stefanik is now considered a contender for the whip's role in a potential GOP majority next year. A Stefanik spokesperson denied that Trump Jr.'s allies had relayed any such message, calling it another desperate attempt to falsely and anonymously smear Congresswoman Stefanik and her team. No one has reached out to our team about this malicious, dishonest rumor other than you, said spokesperson Ali Black, while others seem to be focused on attacking Congresswoman Stefanik. She is laser focused on giving 100% as conference chair and representative for New York's 21st District. One Republican familiar with the conversation said behind the scenes furor began when people in Trump Jr.'s circle heard about Stefanik's team making comments to the press that targeted Banks and Buckley Carlson, who's worked for the Republican Study Committee chair since 2019. Trump Jr. allies made their displeasure with Stefanik clear through mutual friends, according to this Republican. A spokesperson for Banks' office did not respond to a request for comment. While Trump Jr.'s allies may have offered their displeasure with Stefanik, it appears she hasn't alienated the former president himself. Stefanik is slated to deliver a special video address at the former president's rally for Cheney challenger Harriet Hageman in Casper, Wyoming, this weekend. I guess this happened over the weekend. Oh, yes, that's right. We heard about that one and all of the Republican idiot/luminaries who were scheduled to attend, and it made me start walking around the house singing the Bayraktar song that Greg sent me for no particular reason. Well, anyway, she was scheduled to be at that rally this weekend and is poised to headline a rally with Trump early next month at Trump National Golf Club in her home state. Encouraging reporters to run negative stories about political rivals is hardly rare on Capitol Hill, particularly as jostling begins to intensify among House Republicans seeking to climb the leadership ladder under next year's increasingly likely, they say, GOP majority. Stefanik has options for her next role, but exploring them means she will likely invite a slew of possible competitors should she run for posts like Majority Whip or Conference Chair next year. That potentially includes Banks. But any efforts to raise Buckley Carlson could be the political equivalent of touching a third rail. Go for it. The son of one of conservative media's most influential voices has his own friends in powerful circles. These races get cutthroat, and they're cutthroat because they're about the race that's going to happen immediately after the elections, but also about setting yourself up or your allies up for future races, said GOP strategist Doug Heye, who previously worked for former House Majority Leader Eric Cantor. Going to the press is the quickest way to do it, and part of the irony here with Republicans is they'll often say, well, you can't believe the Beltway media, but this is where these games play out, right? Stefanik's relationship with Donald Trump may remain on solid footing. She continues to present herself as one of his most loyal supporters on Capitol Hill, calling herself Ultra MAGA, in a nod to his backers' embrace of a label that Democrats have tried to use against them. Her standing with Tucker Carlson, however, is shakier. The Fox News host has criticized her on air for her support of Ukraine aid, giving voice to conservative skepticism about her once moderate persona that she has worked to bury. The elder Carlson criticized the idea of a future speakership bid by Stefanik on his show last month, calling her a puppet of the Democratic Party. Sure, why not? It's clear that the 37-year-old Stefanik plans to rise higher in the GOP, having minted friends in the party from her work electing Republican women through her PAC even before she took Cheney's place as the highest-ranking woman in congressional party leadership. But where her upward trajectory takes her next is less certain. By the way, note in passing that she has risen in leadership by campaigning to help Republican candidates elsewhere win. And I'm sure that included giving away lots of money to do it too and helping raise that money at fundraisers. That's how leadership credentials are built. I've told you that a million times. For months, senior Republicans saw signs that she was gearing up for a run for the whip role if the House flips next year, as polling projects and historical trends reflect. Still, some House Republicans believe she's stepping back from a whip race that could pit her against National Republican Congressional Committee Chair Tom Emmer of Minnesota, Chief Deputy Whip Drew Ferguson of Georgia, and Banks, as first reported by the Washington Examiner. No serious name recognition versus Stefanik's star power there, but we'll see whether she's given out enough money to overcome what they've done. And who knows what they've done? We should look into it at some time. They're, ironically, we've mentioned this before, they're actually less married to the money measure than to the ideological metric than Democrats are. It's odd, but there it is. But other Stefanik colleagues suggested nothing has been ruled out. She could also choose to run again for conference chair or seek the top GOP spot on the Education and Labor Committee. In case you haven't noticed, it's people like Tucker Carlson and Elise Stefanik who have been taking incoming hit pieces from the media and the left. No one across America knows or cares about Jim Banks or how he runs his office, for that matter. One senior Republican said of the Stefanik speculation, speaking candidly on condition of anonymity, the more hit pieces on Stefanik that are unloaded anonymously, the weaker the other whip candidates look because it's clear they're fearful of her strength. How do you like that? This is a strategy. Have never been under any scrutiny themselves and can't run for whip on their own merits. Of course, right, the more they attack me, the more it shows that they fear me. And because they fear me, I'm the one for the job. It's interesting reverse psychology. And CNN reported this week that she's being considered as a potential Trump running mate if the former president opts to run again in 2024. But other Republicans in his orbit have said that while he's expressed interest in running with a female candidate, any speculation about 2024 is premature. Meanwhile, Stefanik is already feeling the sting of a rising national profile in the form of recent negative news coverage, including blowback for a tweet about pedo grifters and an immigration ad that Democrats blasted as echoing the racist replacement theory. Very interesting and worth keeping an eye on. And the more infighting going on there, the better, as far as I'm concerned. So let them all kill one another, I say. Rhetorically speaking. Anyway, let's see. Other items that we might want to squeeze in before we close out here today. And, we never got a chance to connect with Joe, and I imagine there's plenty going on coming back from a long weekend. And also, the old, it's not Monday, it's Tuesday thing. Understandable, 100% forgivable. And, of course, there's plenty for us to get along with. It's not, I wouldn't say we could live without you. But we made it through. We certainly miss you, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk to you maybe even later this week, just for fun. And if not, certainly next week. I wanted to bring up this item that I saw being circulated at the end of the week, last week, following the shooting down in Texas. Interesting because I think it was being circulated as sort of a right-wing pro-gun rallying point. I thought that was kind of interesting. A picture of what is purported to be a sign, like a laminated, 8.5 by 11 sheet that they printed out and turned it into a sign and posted it in a school in Ohio, according to John Rich, who is, I don't know who. It says here in his bio, half of Big and Rich, founder of Redneck Riviera. And, I don't know, he's into whiskey and barbecue sauce. And I don't know, maybe he's a podcaster like me. I don't know. Anyway, he's got a blue check mark, so something. But he says, posted at a school in Ohio. And the sign says, printed over a, faded back image of the Indian chief head, which I guess is their mascot and logo, which is another issue there in Ohio and elsewhere. But the sign says, attention, by authorization of the RHLSD superintendent. LSD is an interesting combination of letters to put in the end of it, but I don't know where. A Rock Hill Local School District. There you are. The Rock Hill Local School District staff is trained and armed by authorization, not by authority, but by authorization of the RHLSD superintendent. Rock Hill Local School District staff is trained and armed. Any attempt to harm children or staff will be met with whatever force is necessary to protect our students. And the threat there, of course, is that they will take the guns out and shoot you if you're a mass shooter or a bad guy or what have you. Any attempt to harm children or staff will be met with whatever force is necessary to protect our students. And, I'm sure it's an interesting rallying point for conservatives who believe that they'll actually do that stuff. I just wanted to point out that people in Uvalde thought someone was going to do that for them too, and they didn't. And that's worth thinking about, as we all think about what it means to have quote-unquote first responders armed and on site for handling just these things, and then there's still really no good explanation as to why that didn't materialize. Things are just getting worse. The timelines they're offering just making things worse, and eventually I think they're just going to have to give up and say, actually, all that stuff is bad, and then they'll go all in on the doors thing, I guess, because that continues over the weekend as well. All right, well, time for us to wrap things up and hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next. Let's read what he's got on tap for us. As by way of teasers that you will stay tuned, the Justice Department announced that it will conduct a review of the law enforcement response to the mass shooting at Robb Elementary School. By the way, I can handle that for you. Review's done. We all know what happened, and we all know why it happened, and let's get serious and get back to work about other things we haven't been paying enough attention to. But there's more, and I'll tease you with that after this.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Familiar issue here. The TSA reports a spike in travelers trying to bring guns through airport checkpoints. And far-right activist Alan West's bid to take over the NRA ended in humiliating failure. Oh, I love it. Humiliating failure? Alan West? Let's all stay tuned for that one. Next, right here on Netroots Radio. We'll see you tomorrow.